and good morning, and I'm back for another YouTube video after another international break, another chance to regroup, I think, for me and for Newcastle United. But it's back for Newcastle against Chelsea, St James's Park on Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock kickoff, which when you think about Chelsea coming to town, Newcastle this season, 3 o'clock seems quite an odd time to play that game. But I think it's a good opportunity. Obviously, it's, as I say, it's been a while since I've done a video, which is it's great to be back. I always like to take these opportunities to have a little break when the international scene is in town, because it's so hectic when it's not, and obviously that's going to kick into overdrive now. Running up to Christmas, Newcastle don't have, I think off the top of my head, don't have a week off between now and Christmas, so that'll mean sort of 4 videos a week for me, which is great. But obviously, I think everybody needed a little bit of a break after that last international break, which ended with that defeat at Bournemouth. Newcastle having the chance to bounce back against Chelsea this weekend. Most of the injury problems that have been so well documented, obviously this is a hugely difficult injury crisis for Newcastle to manage, are not likely to ease this weekend. However, one huge one that could is Alex Isak, which is very, very well timed, considering that it looks like Callum Wilson's going to be out for 6 weeks now. We'll hear from Eddie Howe later. I'm recording this video early. You will probably have heard it by the time you're watching this. I've got work all day covering all the press conferences for the BBC Sport website later, so I'm recording this video nice and early before I start work. Just with a few quick thoughts on where Newcastle stand going into this game. I think Isak coming back is huge, because it means that Gordon can go out to the left again, where he's so much more dynamic and so much more devastating for Newcastle. I think Eddie Howe sees him as a third option up front when Isak and Wilson aren't there. And I sort of said on the True Faith podcast a couple of weeks ago that I sort of understand that. I think if you buy too many strikers, I think that Newcastle do need a third striker incidentally, but I can understand the sort of thought process where you don't want to overpopulate that area, because you've seen what happened with Tottenham and Harry Kane for years. If you come in knowing you're not going to play ahead of Isak and ahead of Wilson, then it's difficult to convince a player of the right ilk to come in. I think one thing that's interesting that will happen, and we'll get into January in a minute, I think one thing that's interesting will happen in the window is Newcastle did want a right winger in at the start of the summer, and I think the player who can play across that front three will be a huge asset, I think, in January, given that Newcastle are without Jacob Murphy for a while, and Miguel Almiron's obviously picked up a bit of an injury. He should be fit for Saturday against Chelsea, but that sort of thin, the nature of those injuries means that it's thin on the right and obviously thin up front at the moment with Isak and Wilson both battling injuries. But Gordon going back onto the left will be absolutely huge for the way Newcastle play. He's such a threat down there. I think he when he gets more involved, Newcastle automatically become more of a threat, and I think that's something that Eddie Howe will consider going into January. Obviously, the big talking point about January is, as I say, we'll get into more detail on this, the midfield. But Saturday's game, Newcastle, I think Almiron will be back. Longstaff should be fit. I think we'll hear from Eddie Howe in about an hour's time from when I'm speaking, and then Isak up front as well. It's going to be a strong first 11, which is a good sign. Newcastle obviously generally will be rested. I think the key thing to remember, also but you do have to consider the likes of Joe Linton, the likes of Bruno Guimaraes, who are coming back from international duty, from long distances, playing in South America, playing for Brazil against Argentina this week. What a game that was in so many ways. And obviously Joe Linton's red card seemed to me to be absolutely ridiculous. But I think Newcastle generally, the issue that started to plague them at the end wasn't just the injuries. It was also the fact that the existing players who were fit and were playing were under pressure to keep themselves fit, and their fitness and their sharpness was deteriorating by the week. They were tired and they needed a rest. So I think the fact that this international break's been and gone, it's 2 weeks where Newcastle haven't had to exert themselves too much. Obviously, Kieran Trippier went away, came back early for a personal issue, was always likely to face Chelsea, will probably face Chelsea on Saturday, as far as we're concerned. Newcastle, now those players are rested. Newcastle are back at St James's Park as well, where they're looking for the first time to win 5 games in a row without conceding since 1907, I believe. It's huge when you consider that all the discourse has been about how Newcastle have fallen behind in the Champions League race after that defeat to Bournemouth. I think there's a little bit of a lack of nuance with this, like everything with this discussion, because they've just beaten Arsenal in those really controversial circumstances. They've obviously lost to Dortmund, which was poor, but in the manner that they did. But again, if that's in the Champions League, it's not going to affect the league form. The Bournemouth defeat just felt like it was too far, given all these issues that they were dealing with. But Chelsea coming to St James's Park in good shape themselves. Obviously, that 4-4 draw, I think, was one of the best games I've ever seen in the Premier League against Manchester City 2 weeks ago. Obviously, there also that win over Tottenham, which was sort of circumstantial because of Tottenham's red cards and injuries and all that sort of thing. But the key thing is that Mauricio Pochettino is building something at Chelsea. Quite obviously, it looks like Chelsea are in a better position than they were, last year when Graham Potter came, and that was such a huge win to end the first half of the season before the World Cup with Joe Willock's goal at St James's Park. Chelsea have been very good against top sides, I think, this season. They were impressed me against Liverpool on the opening day, obviously Tottenham, and then Man City as well. I think that they're going to be a threat, and I think that this is going to be a very tough game. I've written an article on Nicholas Jackson the other week, who I think is getting a little bit of a rough deal. I think he's got all the raw qualities to threaten Newcastle and threaten teams. I think he showed that in pre-season. If you remember back in America, he was very good in that game. And yeah, I think Chelsea are going to be a huge threat. Newcastle, though, back at St James's Park, obviously that form is very good, and that's something to. They'll never fear anybody back at home, and the fact that Isak will be back, and the fact that those players are rested, will mean that they're in good spirits. And it's another huge game, because obviously every game is huge. Given the situation with Botman, where we don't know when he's going to be back, obviously the thing with Botman is more about waiting to allow his knee to heal rather than just rushing in for surgery and guaranteeing that he'll be out for a while. So I think there is a genuine sort of patience there, rather than sort of mystification about whether he's going to when he's going to be back and how long he's going to be out. Whereas you've got Wilson for 6 weeks now looking likely, and obviously Lewis Hall can't play in this game as well against his parent club. So could Tino Livramento come in at left back, or Kieran Trippier move to left back and Livramento play at right back? I think that's the most obvious thing, given that Dan Burn, when I was in Dortmund, somebody told me that he's back in 3 places, 10 weeks he was told. So, Eddie Howe said 2 to 3 months. So, yeah, likely that he's going to be out for a while. Obviously, Matt Targett as well. So the left back situation is looking a little bit threadbare. I think most likely is Trippier will go to left back and Livramento will come in at right back. But generally, Newcastle it feels like they're in a good space now. Obviously after that break, they're bouncing back. Isak up front is absolutely huge, because that allows the press to happen. Allows Gordon to go back on the left, which is a huge thing as well. That could be a decisive factor in this game. And heading into Paris away, to PSG away on Tuesday, it's a start of another huge batch of games that probably doesn't end till just after Christmas. So yeah, it's all go from here. Then the January transfer window comes in. I said we touch on that, and I think that I think midfield is because of the situation with Tonali, and injuries when they've happened to Willock and to Joe Linton. There's probably a need in an understanding of a need to improve that area this window. And Calvin Phillips is, I think it's the worst kept secret that he's the main target. Obviously, we know that the affiliated close vote didn't go through, so Newcastle are free to sign Ruben Neves, even though I think that was just purely an idea, a suggestion. I don't think that's actually going to happen. I know that they like Ruben Neves, but once he went to Al Hilal, I think they sort of moved on, and the opportunity with Calvin Phillips is one that I think that they're going to try and take. You've got other players, in attack as well that have been linked, and I think it's going to be a very interesting window where a couple of players will probably come in, 2 or 3. I don't think there'll be a massive overhaul. I do think they've adjusted for this window because of the injury crisis. I do think they're reacting. There is money available, so it's going to be a very interesting window to watch. I'm off to PSG away on Sunday, so I won't be able to react to the game probably on its own, but I'll bring you some sort of travel vlog or some thoughts from out in Paris. I'm really looking forward to getting out there for the final Champions League away group game. And let's get into this huge run before Christmas. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.